So here's a post-game analysis from the first-person perspective. It's going to be the Beastmen against the vampire counts, and for today it's going to be a pretty single entity heavy build. I have 2 Gorgons, we got Taurochs, and we got some chariots. Not single entities, but they do pose a pretty big threat to the vampire count units. The idea of this build is to have a bit of threat overload so that they can't easily shut down any single target. From there, I'll be able to hopefully win out the single entity fight and win from there. Now, there are a couple weaknesses with the build though. Taking a look at my caster, this time I only brought 1, which does expose them pretty hard to sniping attempts. I was a little bit more comfortable bringing just the 1 this time though, because the map was fairly small, so I was pretty sure I could get at least some of my winds of magic out. We'll see how much value they get by the end of the game. As for my opponent, you can see they have taken quite a few single entities of their own. It's going to be some Vargulfs, and although generally a lot of people say that this matchup doesn't have a lot to control, there actually is quite a bit. It's just very different from your usual types of play. More jockeying for position rather than being able to react quickly. Now, my first goal, it's going to be getting engaged as quickly as possible, so I'm sort of just rushing forwards as fast as I can without stalling too often. A charge in the back does come on in, and this is a perfect opportunity for my caster to throw down a Traderkin. It's especially good when overcast against cavalry, because it will take out 14 models guaranteed. It's like a third of the HP off that unit of cavalry there, and even catching a few dogs too actually nearly gets them crumbling away there. Meanwhile, my chariots bounce along the right side to clear up some infantry, but they immediately pull away from the Vargulfs. The reason I do this is because it's a very bad matchup, and by luring the Vargulfs in, you can see the 2, not the Blood Brutes, the Gorgons do dive on in, and we'll be able to punish those Vargulfs. And this is actually what really changes the matchup as of late. The Gorgons, having just absolutely excellent mass, can really bully the Vargulfs, and they are rather quick too. So if they actually manage to dive on in, they will generally get a few hits. Another cool thing about the chariots too is that you can actually use them for mass. And as you can see here, I do pin down that dragon in the north side of the map and get a pretty good surround. If the Lord dives in on my chariots from the wrong angle, they are gonna take a lot of damage on their way out. You can see already down 1/3 HP from that initial engagement. I even sent in Taurochs to help fight too. Meanwhile, the Jabberslite, not exactly a great single entity combatant. You can see I'm just sending it in along the left-hand flank, and the reason I do that is to try and bait out the vampire count's forces. If they decide to go for that, then my Gorgons will be able to slowly take out that White King on the right-hand side. And if my opponent does decide to split up their single entities, I am a lot more mobile, so I should be able to pick and choose the fights that I want to. And there you go, you can see he does land his Lord on the left side. He's not able to support the Vargulfs on the right side, and the Vargulfs are going to be having a pretty bad time. Meanwhile, I disengage with the units that are not meant to fight single entities, that being the chariots and the Jabberslite. And as a small bonus, I even get a bit of a surround on that Vargulf with using those chariots, which does actually let me land a pretty nasty hit onto them. The Gorgons will easily knock down the Vargulfs just due to their mass, so you can actually get into some situations where they get stun locked. Meanwhile, the attempts on hunting down my Jabberslite were not really, well, it didn't really work out too well, as the Jabberslite does manage to escape with most of its HP. And I've done a bit of a switcheroo with my chariots and single entities. The chariots are now along the right side, and my actual fighters, the Gorgons and Taurochs, are on the left side. And for the vampire counts to get on top of the chariots, he has to run past my much scarier threats. And you can see, diving in with the Vargulf, it does get punished in the end. Now, things do get a little bit more dicey here, as I do start running out of infantry, and it does mean that I am going to have to stand my ground a lot more. This means that repositioning with a lot of my units is going to get a lot harder, and as you can see in the back, my chariots, they do start running into some issues and have to disengage. Actually, strangely enough, in the top right, that chariot managed to knock down a Vargulf. I missed that in the actual battle, but nevertheless, the chariots still have to run away, which means that it's really all on my single entities to clear out. Still a rather large amount of infantry. It's going to be a little bit scary, but my rallying forces do come back in, and thanks to the Traderkin earlier in the game, my infantry don't really have too much to really worry about in terms of being run down. By just getting in a ton of shock damage on the vampire count's mobility, they eventually did crumble away, and that means that all of these rallying forces will be able to come back in and provide some much needed barriers for my single entities to do well. But even despite that, you can see they still manage to push through the infantry and land a few hits on the I think it's a Strigoi vampire lord. He will be coming on in to try and get some cycle charges, though. For most of the game, he's been focusing down the Jabberslite, and that's a pretty good idea, since the Jabberslite is really good at clearing out the infantry, which is what's really holding me back at the current moment. So you can see he comes on in for a nice dive in, but a quick reaction and target down of the Dragon Lord actually gets me quite a few hits onto him. The Dragon Lord tries to disengage, but as he tries to run away, he's going to be getting hit in the back by the Gorgons, and this is actually one of the main problems in this matchup. It's very difficult to cycle charge with your Lord without taking a few hits on your way back up into the air. And just looking at the balance of power now, things are very much so in my favor, and in a moment's time I will be taking the victory. Now, something you'll have to remember about this build in particular is that you have to worry about your characters getting sniped out. I would recommend taking 2 casters most of the time, unless the map is extremely small. But other than that, it's definitely a very strong build against the vampire counts, as long as you maneuver your units correctly. Now, if you enjoyed this content, you can find out more over on my channel. Special thanks to my patrons too, Red Wedding Planner, Romacarol, and Biblington, for supporting the latter where I played this match.